United States, Arizona, Apache Sitgreaves National Forests, November 5th, 1975. Many believe that we are alone in the universe. However, one day something inexplicable happened. Something that forced us to ask ourselves, is this really true? A crew of 7 loggers began their workday in the forest. The stress level was high, as the crew chief, Mike Rogers, had realized a few weeks earlier that the job would not be completed on time. None of them had any idea that an even greater stress was approaching, and that something would happen that night. Something that would change their lives forever. As the workday came to an end, and the sun began to set beyond the horizon, plunging the landscape into darkness, the men gathered their supplies and got into the truck, intending to return home for the evening. Shortly after starting their journey, the men noticed bright flashes of light coming from behind a hill and thought that a fire must have broken out. As they drove closer, they realized it was not a fire at all. Just above the tree line, they saw a large, silver object in the shape of a flattened disc hovering in the air. It was about 8 feet thick and 20 feet wide. The object was accompanied by a loud buzzing sound that filled the truck and penetrated every part of their bodies. Mike Rogers, the truck driver and leader of the logging crew, slowed the vehicle to a stop, trying to determine exactly what he was seeing. None of the men had ever encountered anything like it before. They sat there for a moment, terrified, mouths agape, until a sudden sound pushed their panic even further. Travis Walton, a 22-year-old member of the logging crew, pulled the handle of one of the truck doors and stepped out, heading toward the lights and the flying saucer in the sky. Travis really had no idea what he was doing. He couldn't explain why he felt the urge to approach the disc hovering in the air, emitting that burning bright light. But that was exactly what he did. It was as if a higher force was pulling him toward the object, compelling him to move closer to the light. He couldn't resist the presence of this thing not from Earth. It was both terrifying and mesmerizing. As he approached the craft, it remained in place, seemingly undisturbed by his presence. Finally, he stopped, standing directly beneath the object, completely bathed in its light. His hair stood on end, and he felt a crackle of electrical current in the air. For a moment, everything fell silent, except for the high-pitched buzzing and the low rumble of the truck's engine. Suddenly, the craft shot a beam of blue-green light directly at Travis, throwing him 10 feet back. He fell helplessly to the ground while the shocked men watched from the truck. The sight was too much for Mike, who, like the rest of the crew, instinctively feared for his life and slammed the gas pedal, fleeing with the rest of the team. They drove a quarter of a mile down the road, panicking and screaming, trying to process what they had just seen. Was it real? Did it actually happen? And more importantly, was Travis okay? Or had they just witnessed their coworker die, tossed through the air like a rag doll by a mysterious beam of light? After about 15 minutes, Mike turned back. The men gathered the courage to take another look at the scene and find out what had happened to Travis. But when they returned to the clearing, the lights were gone, leaving only darkness. They searched for Travis's body, expecting to find it still lying on the ground, but Travis had vanished. There was no body, no blood, no sign that anything extraordinary had happened there. Travis Walton had simply disappeared. Travis woke up on an examination table, his eyes still closed. It began with pain, burning, blinding, and paralyzing his thoughts throughout his entire body. His last memories were of the forest, the bright light, and the strange disc in the sky. Now he was here. But where exactly was here? A hospital? That would make a lot of sense. The guys had probably taken him to a hospital, and now he was being treated for his injuries. But as his mind struggled through the fog of pain and confusion, Travis began to notice that something about this place wasn't quite right. The room was hot and humid, and his hair clung to him, emitting a thick, musty odor. He was sweating profusely, and damn, why was it so hot? He swallowed, and his dry, dehydrated tongue was coated with a bitter, metallic taste. His body trembled as if he had a fever. Maybe an infection? Whatever it was, something was wrong. He needed to see how bad everything was, and forced his exhausted eyelids open. As he opened his eyes, his vision wavered and blurred, and he couldn't quite make out his surroundings. Slowly, the images began to stabilize in his eyes, first as indistinct colors and shapes, then as more recognizable objects. He was connected to something, a device attached to his torso, running from his armpits to his abdomen. He didn't recognize it, but whatever it was made of a smooth, dark gray material. The ceiling above him seemed off, skewed and triangular. Was something wrong with his eyes? No. As his vision grew sharper, he noticed that the ceiling did indeed have a strange shape. He had never been in a room like this before. He shifted his gaze to the rest of the room, seeing what he could from his position on the examination table. As he slowly began to regain his visual clarity, he noticed 3 figures standing next to him, which he initially mistook for doctors, until he saw their enormous, glowing brown eyes. He tried to make out their faces, and then one of the figures came close enough for him to see clearly. If Travis had the strength, he would have screamed it at the top of his lungs. This was not a hospital, and these were not doctors. The beings in the room with him had a humanoid shape, but they were certainly not human. Their skin was completely white and devoid of pigment, as if bleached. They had no hair on their faces or bodies, no eyebrows or eyelashes. Pure primal instinct took over. Travis got to his feet, unsteadily trying to find his balance, stumbling backward and crashing into a bench filled with unfamiliar surgical tools. He didn't take his eyes off the creatures, fearing that if he looked away, they might attack. His legs were still too weak and his knees buckled beneath him. He collapsed to the floor as the 3 aliens approached with their arms outstretched. The sheer terror triggered by their advancing steps fueled a surge of adrenaline in him. Travis grabbed anything he could use to defend himself. His desperate hands found a long cylinder made of thin, transparent material. He smashed the tube against the metal table, but it didn't break. Desperately, he decided to improvise, standing up and wildly waving the cylinder around, shouting nonsensical threats and curses that the creatures likely didn't understand. The alien beings stopped, making no sounds. Travis braced himself for a final fight, but suddenly all 3 creatures turned and left the room. The man, leaning against the bench, struggled to catch his breath. After a moment, he resumed his search for a weapon. None of the tools on the bench were suitable for self-defense, and the cylinder was almost useless. He threw it to the ground and decided to flee. He dashed out of the room and ran down the corridor in the same direction the aliens had gone. He encountered no one on the way. He saw something that resembled a door and thought it might lead to an escape from this nightmare. He entered a room where he saw a space with a domed ceiling and a single chair with a high back. Unable to check if the chair was occupied, he cautiously tiptoed inside. As he approached the chair, the room around him began to darken, and the sky transformed into a black expanse dotted with tiny points that looked like stars. On the chair there were controls, a lever on the left arm and a green screen on the right above a square of colored buttons. Out of curiosity, he pressed one of the buttons, but nothing happened. He tried another, but still nothing. Exhausted and terrified, he sat in the chair and grabbed the lever. He pushed it forward, and the stars around him began to move. Surprised, he returned the lever to its original position and stood up. If this controlled where he was being held, he didn't want to accidentally break something and put himself in even more danger. Then he heard a sound behind him. He turned around, expecting another alien, but instead, he saw a human man in a blue velour suit and helmet. Feeling a mix of relief and confusion, Travis ran toward the man. The man didn't respond, and with a slight smile, took Travis by the arm and led him out of the room. Travis followed the man through the ship to a small empty room, where they waited for about 2 minutes until another door slid open. These led them down to a room resembling a hangar, with a curved roof that arched all the way to the floor. The air was clean and cool. In the vast room, Travis could see the outside of the craft, which looked like the one from the forest, but was much larger. The man led Travis to a white room where there were 2 more men and a woman, all dressed in the same uniforms. They were strikingly attractive, almost unnaturally so, as if they were related. Travis begged for answers, asking where he was, what was happening, and who those terrible creatures were. No one responded. They just looked at him with blank expressions. The woman and one of the men approached Travis, took him by the arms, and directed him toward a table. They lifted him and sat him on the edge of the table. Travis felt panic rising, having no idea what was happening. He struggled against the strangers, but the woman placed a transparent mask, resembling an oxygen mask, over his face. That was Travis's last memory from the alien ship. Then everything went black. At the moment of Travis's abduction, the logging crew drove to the nearest phone booth and contacted Officer L.C. Ellison. Ellison, from the Navajo County Sheriff's Office, along with Sheriff Marlon Gillespie and Deputy Kenneth Coplin, went to meet the logging crew. They asked to be taken to Turkey Springs and shown the exact location where Travis was last seen. Rogers agreed, and along with 2 members of the crew, took the officers back to the scene, where they searched for any trace of Travis until midnight. Marlon Gillespie believed the men were telling the truth. He had even seen a large UFO in the county several years earlier. The search was then halted, with plans to continue the next day. There was no sign of Travis anywhere, and they had to inform his family. Sheriff Coplin and Rogers visited Travis's mother and told her that her son was missing. To their surprise, she reacted quite calmly. Coplin was taken aback but offered to drive her into town so she could call Travis's brother and sister, as there was no phone at her home. Like Travis's mother, his siblings surprisingly took the news quite well. None of them seemed particularly concerned about Travis or his safety. They simply accepted his disappearance as a fact, almost inevitable. On November 7th, locals formed a search party of nearly 50 people, combing the area around Turkey Springs for Travis or signs of foul play. The logging crew also participated, except for Steve, who was still in slight shock. Mike Rogers recalled seeing a man in a Forest Service uniform scanning the area with a Geiger counter during the search. When he scanned the loggers' helmets, the needle jumped to 4 times the normal radiation level. The man looked at the loggers and then walked away, ignoring their request to test the truck. They found nothing, and after several hours of searching, Travis's mother suggested calling off the search. It was temporarily suspended, but resumed the next morning after complaints from Rogers and Travis's brother, Dwayne. Meanwhile, local media and UFO enthusiasts began to take an interest in the story. After 2 days, the search expanded to include air support, and news of the event reached the media. Shortly thereafter, William Spaulding, a researcher from the Ground Saucer Watch Group based in Phoenix, visited the site and reported unusual electromagnetic readings and residual ozone traces. The search intensified on November 9th, the 4th day of Walton's absence. The police, citizens, and even members of Walton's family increasingly suspected that the men had made up the whole story to cover up a murder or a fatal accident. On November 11th, each of the 6 members of the logging crew was brought in for questioning and polygraph tests by the Arizona Department of Public Safety and asked if they had done anything that could have harmed Travis. They all denied having anything to do with his disappearance. 5 of the 6 men were determined to be telling the truth, while the results for the 6th man, Alan Dallas, were inconclusive. However, in the final report, Cy Gilson wrote that, in his opinion, all the men were telling the truth. That night, around midnight, approximately 5 days and 6 hours after his disappearance, Walton regained consciousness lying face down by the side of a road near Heber, Arizona. He looked up and saw a white light fading from the bottom of a highly reflective, silvery, disc-shaped UFO hovering just above the road in front of him. As he later recalled, the object was about 40 feet in diameter and 14 feet high. In an instant, the object disappeared from sight, shooting into the sky at an inhuman speed without making a sound. Travis's brother-in-law, Grant, woke up in the middle of the night to a collect call request from the operator. As soon as he heard the caller's name on the other end, he was speechless. It was Travis. Grant picked up Dwayne, Travis's brother, and both men rushed to Heber to find a trembling, confused, and noticeably thinner Travis. He had a 5-day beard growth and a small mark on the inside bend of his right elbow, suggesting he had received some sort of injection. Travis mentioned the growth of his beard, wondering how it had grown so fast in just one night. He was convinced he had only been gone for an hour. Although he did not appear to be injured, his eyes were red and remained that way for some time. Later examinations showed that he had lost 10 kilograms, about 22 pounds. After nearly 50 years, many, including Walton himself, believe he was taken aboard an extraterrestrial spacecraft. Throughout the years, he has never changed his version of events. The abduction experience transformed Walton as a person. Walton became more introspective and interested in the philosophical and spiritual aspects of life. His alleged encounter with extraterrestrial beings prompted him to think more deeply about humanity's place in the universe and the meaning of existence. Following the abduction, Walton often struggled with anxiety, stress, and sleep disorders. For a long time, he experienced nightmares and feelings of paranoia, which may have resulted from the trauma he experienced during the alleged abduction. Over time, Walton became one of the most prominent voices in the UFO community, actively promoting his story and participating in conferences, interviews, and publications about UFOs. His interest in UFOs and alien civilizations became a kind of mission to convince others of the truth of his experience. Don't be afraid to speak the truth. If you have your own story, experiences, or evidence related to UFOs, please email us. Your story is important and can help others who have had similar experiences. UFO X-Files connects us. You are not alone.